Hey guys, this is Nolapada, and today I'm going to be talking about a No Man's Sky update like no other. No Man's Sky Next. I've covered previous updates, but guys, this update is what made No Man's Sky what it is today. This is what No Man's Sky should have been at launch. Would it have been possible given funding and time constraints? Possibly not. But this update not only made up for the crappy launch, it was the basis for all the incredible content that they've added since then. They labeled it 1.5, but this, in my book, was No Man's Sky 2.0. This update was announced earlier than an actual trailer came out. It was May 17th of 2018. Since it was now going to be coming to Xbox, it made sense for them to announce it ahead of time and to get a little bit of hype going for it.
What's the story on multiplayer for No Man's Sky?
When No Man's Sky launches, July 24th, you're going to be able to play with your friends. Kind of a full multiplayer experience.
Amazing.
Right? And this is something that, I wish we could have done sooner, but I'm so glad it's happening, right? We've been playtesting it in the studio for the last 6 months. It's a really different experience.
Although at first they only released the name No Man's Sky Next and revealed that it would be adding multiplayer, little did we know that the next update would add so many great features that I will get into in this video. And it also did something that to this day many players are not a fan of. If you want to know what that is, stick with this video because I will cover all of it. The trailer for Next dropped a week before release. The fans were excited to say the least. Listen to this.
Look at those trees. Holy
Those street clouds! Clouds! The graphics, dude, what the f***? The gap, what the fuck? What the fuck?
Most obvious in the trailer was that we now had third-person models. We had full multiplayer, new base parts, improved graphics, Frigate Fleets, rings around planets like Saturn. You had to be there. If you were a No Man's Sky fan at this time, this was the most hype I ever remember having for an update. And it finally dropped July 24th of 2018, just a few days before the second anniversary. Along with multiplayer, Next added near unlimited base building, command of freighter armadas, and a graphical overhaul, and so much more. The first and most obvious feature was full multiplayer. You can now squad up with a group of friends and explore the universe together. You could build bases together and farms. These bases would automatically upload to the cloud, so anyone visiting this planet would see your base. You can now be each other's wingmen in space battles. You could do missions together from a terminal in your freighter. They even made it so you could start the story at the same time and play parallel to each other as squad mates. They also added the option to join a random player session. Although it wasn't perfect, it still worked to a certain extent. It was nice to be joined by random players. Although some people weren't a fan, they were just doing their own thing and then all of a sudden someone pops into their lobby. But I kind of miss it. It kind of had the appeal of just randomly stumbling upon a stranger. But some people were assholes and they would just try to PvP you. They did end up replacing this system with the anomaly and joining player groups. So I'm actually kind of glad that now it's more of an opt-in feature. I understand that part of the original game's appeal was the vibe of just being alone, no one around, and just being by yourself with that dread, I guess. But I'm kind of glad that they added multiplayer because it's not okay to be alone. People are not islands. People are social. And I'm really happy that they fulfilled this promise that was missing since launch. Along with this multiplayer came third-person view. You know, they had made completely detailed models of all different player characters and even the aliens. And now you can see that in its full glory in third-person mode, both on foot and in ship. It's nice to be able to finally fly and look at your ship while you're flying it. They improved player movement as well. It was kind of janky sometimes, and they improved it so now that there's better physics when you're sliding down a cliff or when you're using your jetpack and flying around. We take it for granted now, but going from Atlas Rises to this, there's definitely an improvement to movement. And they added a bunch of fun gestures, what other games call emotes. And to be honest, I feel like they should add a few more dances.
Look how they massacred my boy.
With this third-person camera also came a pretty decent character customization menu. Not only could you be the default astronaut player, you could be any one of the alien races found in the game, and they actually updated the NPCs to use this same system. Although we did lose a few parts, like for example the weird mouths on Viking, they now scaled correctly and had more expressive animations and sounds. Speaking of sounds, this update added more and better sounding creature noises. And thank God, because the older noises were not the best. They kind of sounded like a possum being run over by a motorcycle. So I'm glad that they had added these more high definition sounds. They also added new folly sounds for the player character, like the satisfying footsteps on gravel, grass, snow, sand. These sounds in games have always been a highlight for me because if a game has good footstep noises, my whole vibe is very improved because sound design is very important to me. And they also improved the audio for ships and ship combat, so that's awesome. Lastly in the sound department, but not least, Paul Weir composed several new tracks for the game, and let me tell you, this guy is talented. His music not only slaps, he has a very interesting talk on procedural music, so if you're into that, definitely check that out. Another huge feature was changes to base building. Now you could build anywhere on any planet. You didn't have to track down a specific room for you to be able to build in that one area. You could pick the area. You could look for a crazy looking cliff. You could go to a beach anywhere on any of these beautiful worlds and have your home. They added hundreds of new base parts. You can now build a teleporter anywhere in this base, and you can have as many bases as you wanted. And the limit to how big and complex your bases was also increased, which is very awesome. No Man's Sky Next also allowed you to hire frigates to join your freighter as a fleet. These were new kinds of ships that were smaller than your actual freighter, but they all had specializations and you could send them on missions. And they were real-time missions, so you could set one for 10 hours and you could go to sleep and you would wake up and they would give you a rundown of all their adventures and they would give you loot. To this day, I really appreciate this feature. This update also added newer base rooms for the freighter bases, and it was well needed because before this, freighter bases used the planet base parts, so it was nice to have specialized rooms. But little did we know that later on, this year 2022, we would get a whole revamp of the freighter bases with Endurance update. But that's not what this video is about, so let's continue. Crafting and resources overhaul. This update changed everything when it comes to materials and crafting. Gone was plutonium, giant pillars of heridium, and thamium-9. I feel nostalgia for these elements, but at the same time, I appreciate the quote-unquote realism that these new sets of materials added. It was more of a cohesive grouping, you know? When this update dropped, I pretty much had to make a new save just to relearn everything. It was like a new game.
What do you mean you can't refuel the launch thrusters with plutonium? Why did they change it? You have to craft fuel? What the heck?
They added many new materials that were specific to certain biomes, star colors, as well as weather conditions. It was a lot less random now. There was now less searching randomly and hoping to find something, and more of a reason for you to seek out certain places to find certain elements. Along with these new sets of elements came an in-depth refinement system. You would put in raw materials and you would process them into more refined and valuable ones. And almost every single element in the game can be refined into something else. And there's even recipes where you can combine certain ones and get unexpected results. So it's actually a very interesting feature. And I usually am not a fan of these kinds of smelting or putting something in a furnace in games. But in No Man's Sky it's actually kind of satisfying. And I'm very glad that they actually added this. It adds a whole depth to crafting. And actually a sense of discovery when you find out what can you combine with what and what turns into what. If you want a detailed guide, there's an app called NMS Assistant. It's on iOS, it's on Android, it's even on PC, and I recommend you check it out. With the additional content I'm going to mention shortly, they needed to expand and revamp space stations, and revamp they did. These expanded space station marketplaces showed off a bunch of new vendors and NPCs actually walking for the first time. they finally got off of their asses and stopped staring at their damn iPads all day. Quick correction time. This update wasn't the update that let them walk. That was the Beyond update, I believe. But at least they weren't just sitting around antisocially. They were in groups now and they were talking to each other. And I think that's pretty cool. What did these vendors sell exactly? Our next feature, procedural tech. What is procedural tech? These are certain upgrades that they sell in the space stations. You no longer have to craft them from materials. And each space station would have ones for your ship, your suit, and your vehicles. And they would have a random selection based on the system. And they all came in different tiers of goodness. For example, S-Class being the best, A being worse than that, B and C, and so on. Each of these would also have their stat buffs randomly generated based on how good the class they are. And it's actually a pretty in-depth system. I greatly prefer it over the old upgrade system. Pre-Next, all of these upgrades were crafted with materials, and they were labeled with Greek letters, like Sigma, Tau, and Theta. And you could only install one of each tier, so it was a bit of a pain memorizing if the Ligma upgrade was better than the Beta one. Once you installed them, you did have a number showing you if it was higher or lower tier. I still greatly prefer the procedural upgrades. Next also improved the analysis visor even further, allowing you to find the new types of resource deposits and buried items easily, and you could even tag different points of interest. This update also overhauled the beginning of the game, introducing new story beats and an introduction to the newer and advanced features. There were also some new missions available from the mission guide stations. It was photography missions for the photographers out there, hunting, archaeology, freighter battles, and more. Now a big change that is still controversial to this day: terrain generation and graphics. They changed the way that the terrain, the mountains, the valleys, everything was generated. It changed from being very alien looking and kind of janky at times to a more smooth and Earth-like appearance, at least according to the patch notes. I don't know what kind of Earth they were talking about because we got some crazy looking cliffs here, but I digress. A new formula allowed for better performance, and you could have higher draw distances, allowing you to see for miles and miles in every direction. So it was kind of a trade-off, I guess. They also mentioned navigability as a reason for the change. I guess it is easier to drive these vehicles on smoother ground, but I still miss the pre-Next terrain. I'm just a sucker for it. Maybe it's blind nostalgia, but I like the otherworldly element of what the heck is that mountain, you know? Something that you will never see on Earth. Another quote-unquote improvement was to the color choices that the game used to generate the planets. They went from a more random and saturated selection that would sometimes look like unicorn vomit to a more muted and neutral selection of colors. Many of us thought that they course corrected a bit too hard here, and eventually in a future update called Visions, they would bring back some more vibrant colors, because we had lost color variety in the sky colors, in the water colors, and the terrain colors. That was another thing that Next did that I wasn't a fan of. I ran into a lot of orange planets in these days. I don't know if it's just my random experience, but I feel that the variety had gone down a lot. One of my biggest wishes is that Hello Games implements maybe a legacy galaxy. It might be too much to ask, but wouldn't it be nice to have somewhere where you can go and visit all those older style planets with those crazy hills and crazy colors, but still enjoy the new features that they've added over the years? I can still dream. We'll just have to wait and see. Next wasn't all bad with the Planetary changes. One big improvement was the fact that we can now find huge tree-sized trees now. For some reason on launch we had medium-sized trees, and with Atlas Rises and Pathfinder, we would just have less and less trees that were like not proper forests. Now we had proper forests. We had planets with humongous trees, and even some planets had massive props. We had like the anomalous planets where we could find humongous rock formations or trees, and it added a lot of variety to the gameplay. The universe also now had abandoned systems and empty systems. A lot of people complained that we weren't really discovering anything if all of these NPCs had already built 7-Elevens and McDonald's on every corner. But now we had empty systems with no buildings and no space station. Sometimes we ask for things and we don't realize that gameplay wise, it isn't as fun to go to a planet with no buildings. Just like it isn't as fun to visit these dead planets like the ones that are similar to our moon here on Earth. Even though in our minds it might seem more realistic to have a whole galaxy that's not discovered and only have a few areas that are populated by NPCs, I think what they did is a good balance. Not all the systems are empty now, just a few of them, but it gives you the option to go and find those uncharted planets. Now if you want to go completely alone with no sign of intelligent life anywhere, there's places you can go to scratch that itch, and I'm happy for that option. The graphics were also massively improved in this update, and testing on my PC recently showed me that. I went from sub 60 FPS with a lot of drops in Atlas Rises to a smooth as butter 60 frames on the next version. I love optimizations like this. A cool feature of these new graphics is tessellation, which in normal English means the ground is now more detailed and bumpy without making your PC or console just catch fire trying to render it.
Wow, it's just like real life, man.
The ships and buildings also got new textures, and let me tell you, this change is night and day. Before this, ships looked like toy models. They were very smooth, and I'll admit, I think the old style is kind of cute, but it only made sense for them to match the ships to the new style, leaning more towards realism, you know? These newer ships look sleeker, professional, and they fit in with the new art style. Another cool addition that I mentioned briefly is that now many planets had rings like Saturn. This stuff may seem small, but there was so much hype for this, it makes for some stunning vistas and screenshots, let me tell you. They made bigger oceans on some planets. Before this, water planets were pretty much peppered with islands and seas evenly, but now we had planets that had actual continents and ocean-sized bodies of water. It's a dope feature, not gonna lie. Clouds also look so much better. What am I doing with my life talking about clouds in a video game? These were different on different planets, and they were so much better than the old just flat texture that we had in Atlas Rises and before. It's one of my favorite visual improvements right here. They also have made them less blurry over time and more beautiful, so awesome. The HUD was also adjusted to make it block less of the screen and allow you to enjoy these vistas even more beautifully. You can now split stacks of items and adjust how much you picked up. Thank God for that feature. You can now call any of your ships without having to go to your freighter first. You could fix crashed ships and broken multi-tools with an improved and more enjoyable system. A very important improvement to me was the way that they changed pulsing toward markers in space. It used to be bad, let me tell you. Now the ship would automatically wrap around planets and wouldn't get stuck in atmosphere so much, because it used to be kind of a pain. You would have to angle yourself away from a planet first and then stop pulsing and then adjust your trajectory and then go back towards a marker. Now we have it easy, guys. You youngins don't know how hard we used to have it. Now it takes you directly and it drops you right in front of your marker. Additions to exploration, fauna, and flora. You can now loot buried treasures and ruins. They added buried technology that you can unlock base parts with, and they improved creature behaviors. Many would now act like a herd, fleeing from danger together instead of just kind of derping around like idiots. The improvements in AI and animations made them a lot more lifelike and immersive, thank goodness. Animals used to be way more janky in this game, let me tell you. They improved sentinel behavior a bit, not as much as later updates, but it was a step in the right direction to their artificial intelligence. They added new dangerous plants and animals, for example, the monsters that you can encounter from touching their eggs. I still hope that they add more of these kinds of monsters because they're all pretty much identical on every planet that you go to. I hope at least they add a few more types or different colors, at least anything at this point, because I love a little challenge. Community engagement. Shortly after the next update, we got our first season of weekly missions and Quicksilver events. We can now as a community help unlock new cosmetics. This is what eventually will become the weekend missions we know and love. My favorites are the ones that have short stories attached to each mission, and I kinda wish that they would bring this lore back. Another addition to this update was an out-of-game website called the Galactic Atlas. It's still up to this day.
To this day!
And it showcases many discoveries from before Next, and many dozens of player-made hubs. I love the idea of this website. The patch notes said that it will grow in functionality and expand over time.
So that was a fucking lie.
They kind of not abandoned it, it still shows a progress of community mission. But part of me hopes that they make a new version of this massive galaxy map and allow player submissions or something to keep it up to date. It hasn't really been changed or expanded much since it came out. Something on the product page of the Nintendo Switch edition actually made me wonder if they're gonna add one. Take this with a grain of salt, but let me read it for you. Share your discoveries with them on a map that spans known space. Perhaps you will see the results of their actions, as well as your own. Maybe it's just a weird way of saying that you could run into other people's discoveries in game, but I'm having fun speculating that they're gonna make a new Galactic Atlas website that is up to date. This update added so many more things that I couldn't detail in one video. This update was one of my favorites, it was huge, and even though it made planets all smooth, I still love it, and it's easily the best update up to this point in NMS history. Little did we know that we would get so many more incredible free updates after this one. And if you want to learn more about them, stay tuned because this video is a part of my series covering every major update to No Man's Sky. This has been Nolopada. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. I am out.